Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 39 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening. Just like old times, right? Karile was unacceptably cheerful. Janir and Karile had been led behind Amilla and Cerilius's horses since morning, the spare mount clopping along beside them. "What are you talking about?" Janir asked, keeping her voice down. Oh, you know. You, me, taken captive by one of your utterly charming Argotolum relatives. Doesn't it bring back memories? Oh, yes. Vivid and lifelike memories, none of them pleasant. Stop talking, Amilla snarled, yanking on the rope bound to Karile's wrists. See? Exactly like before, Karile said, grimacing. Janir wasn't in the mood for playful banter. She plodded on, placing one foot in front of the other. The sun was obscured by the snow-laden clouds overhead. Already, banks had begun to settle in large mounds on the sides of the road. Janir was tired and her feet hurt. Holes were wearing in the soles of her boots, and her stomach felt as if it were cannibalizing itself. In front of them, Amilla and Cerilius were hunched over with their mantles wrapped taut around them. Under different circumstances, she might have pitied the Argotolums in their misery. The routine for that day was much the same as the one for the next. They set out at early dawn, stopped to rest twice, and stopped for the night in one of the many identical caves built along the sides of the road. Janir didn't try escaping again, though Karile was doubtless thinking about it. Amilla and Cerilius would kill Karile in an instant if she did, and it would be of no loss to them. Every so often, Janir would glance back behind them along the road, or look around the caves in the evenings with her eyes and powers alike, hoping to find Seovan. But he was never there. Not that he would come out in plain sight, On the morning of the third day, Janir noticed they were steadily traveling in a downward direction. As they went on, the rigid stone that had risen to their left and right for days began to grow lower until they vanished altogether, and the road became a path down an ever-steepening slope. The snow gradually became thinner, then stopped, giving way to unfamiliar spiny bushes and prickly plants. The road went up a short distance, and when they crested the top, there was a vast expanse of sparsely vegetated land stretching out from the base of the mountains to beyond the horizon. At the end of the road below lay a collection of white tents in orderly rows with people, donkeys, horses, camels, and dogs between them. The largest tent was set up in the center of the camp with a banner fluttering from its top. Janir was almost certain that up close she would see the emblazon of a white sunburst. She barely had time to take the sight in when a voice snarled from her right, making her jump. "Halt! Who goes there?" The voice's owner appeared, a medium-sized man dressed in light browns and angling a nocked arrow in their direction. A long wrapping of cloth shielded his head and obscured his face. His clothing covered most of his skin, doubtless to protect him from the unforgiving desert sun and, up here, from the cold air of the mountains. In a moment, at least a dozen more men, all similarly dressed and armed, surrounded them. Cerilius was completely calm, in spite of the arrows ready to fly in their direction in an instant. "Morton Cerilius Polivar Argotolum, and my companion Mortana Amilla Caractic Argotolum, with 2 prisoners of concern to the Lord Argotolum. We are here to meet Mortana Drusilla Tevrist Argotolum and her warriors. She is expecting us." As if to verify his story, Cerilius very slowly pulled out one of his carcatan and held it up for the slavish soldiers to see. Janir thought that she had never heard the word Argotolum used so many times in so few sentences. The Slavish sentries deliberately lowered their weapons. Carcatan must be considered irrefutable proof. The one who had been first to emerge bowed reverently to the 2 Argotolums. "Captain Forvin of the 12th Legion." "Captain," Cerilius mildly responded, briefly inclining his head. "I shall send 2 of my men to escort you," the captain offered. "That shan't be necessary." Ceruleus interjected. As you were. The Slavish soldiers obeyed, slipping back into the brush. It was strange that these so easily deferred to the Argotolum, Janir thought. Ceruleus and Amilla spurred their horses on, jerking Janir and Karile along behind them. Dusk was setting in by the time they reached the foot of the mountain and marched into the Slavish camp. One sentry stopped them, and Ceruleus again relayed who they were and what their business was before they were ushered into the camp with respectful haste. Janir was footsore and exhausted, as she hadn't been since being her brother's prisoner. Beside her, Karile stumbled along, half awake. Golden sand flew into the air every time someone took a step. Tiny pieces of earth inevitably found their way into Janir's nostrils and lungs, making her cough and grating her throat. The cold seemed to sharpen like a blade as the sun set, and the icy air sliced Janir's lungs with each breath. There were a few cedar trees growing in patches here and there, but nothing that could be called a grove, let alone a forest. Somewhere, she could detect the scent of horses, camels, and refuse. The surrounding plain was lined with rows and rows of tents, made from sturdy white canvas. A few of them had lean, small horses tied in front. Some were housing a dozen or more tired-looking Slavish soldiers. Everyone they passed looked up. It must have been a very boring campaign thus far. Janir was mildly surprised when she glimpsed a collection of a dozen small, squat tents set up apart from the others with small, squat men moving around them. Not all the dwarves would have been building the Kryden Road, and some of them must have escaped and come here, she supposed. The dwarves paid no heed to the passing riders and their captives. They spoke low in their native tongue amongst themselves, or quietly worked cleaning odd tools. They appeared utterly wretched, forced to be here, hunched over cook fires and mending frayed boots that were little more than scraps. Many of the Slavish did, too. Most were probably conscripts, dragged from their farms and shops to fight their overlords' wars. Brevia would be conscripting men as well. It was something all rulers did, even Armandius. He never talked about it, but he had forced more than a few of his serfs into warfare. According to the stories she'd never wanted to hear, he'd even killed some of them for attempting desertion. The Argotolums went nearly halfway into the camp before they came to a group of 18 or so tents, set apart from the others. It was almost a separate camp within the Slavish one. Horses were tied outside in orderly lines, their heads down and their tails swishing calmly as they dozed. While the other tents were in rows, these had been set up in a circle around a large fire, roasting what appeared to be a lamb. There were probably 10 people outside, ringed around the fire. Janir saw with the same eerie recognition that each of them was an Argotolum. Even though she didn't know exactly who the other Argotolums were, she knew they were invulnerables as surely as she was. The horses were the first to note the approach of Ceruleus and Amilla. The animals raised their heads and whinnied softly in greeting. In a moment, the 2 Argotolums dismounted as one of the figures beside the fire rose to meet them. In the fading light of the evening, with the fire behind him, it was difficult to make out his features, but he appeared to be young. His face wasn't yet weathered, and he would have seemed a harmless youth if not for the 2 black rods sheathed at his belt. I'm guessing that's the girl? The youth jerked his chin to Janir. Huh, pretty at least. Janir looked away, remembering all too well the last Argotolum who had found her appealing. Where's the servant? He must have meant Ernic. We lost him, Amilla tersely answered. It's good to see you again, Morton Canicade. And you, Mortana Amilla, Morton Ceruleus. The youth smiled. Did you have a horrible trip? I hear Brevia is wretched this time of year. He was far more chipper than any Argotolum Janir had met before. Amilla took the reins of Ceruleus's horse as Ceruleus passed Karile off to Canicade, and dragged Janir into an unoccupied tent. He forced her to the ground and tied her to the center brace. Janir didn't lash out or resist. Now that there were at least a dozen other Argotolums nearby, keeping Janir captive wouldn't be difficult at all. They might kill Karile at any moment, especially if she acted out. Canicade took Karile into another tent and reappeared a moment later. Janir could only guess he had tied Karile inside. Through the tent flaps, Janir could see Amilla and Ceruleus disappear inside different tents. Ceruleus reemerged not long after to join the other Argotolums around the fire. He had changed into a less stern brown tunic and trousers, though his carcatan were still secured to a belt around his waist. He made small talk with the other Argatolums, addressing each of them with the familiarity of old friends. They passed around terracotta cups and a leather sack, almost certainly wine. Their voices were guarded, but a few snatches about horses and supply lines reached her. Janir couldn't make out the details of the other figures seated around the fire with him, nor did she put any real effort into it. All she could think about was that each passing heartbeat brought her closer to the moment when she would again meet the Lord Argatolum, the man she had long wished to forget. In many ways, Janir still was a frightened child. She still feared him just as much as she had on the day she had been sent from the citadel of the Argatolums, Adasha. Maybe she feared him even more. A few minutes later, Amila finally showed herself. She too had changed, but into fitted trousers and a dark brown surcoat that split at the sides and in the front and back, so that she could still ride in it. Amila sighed as she dropped down beside the flames, more sprawling than sitting. Janir stole a glance to the other two Argatolum women by the fire. It seemed that style of dress was standard. "Where's Mortana Drusilla?" Amila wondered, after a few moments of small talk with the other Argatolums. Janir gulped. That was the Argatolum they were supposed to meet. She strained to hear. "In a council with several Vonmar war leaders." An Argatolum, Janir thought his name was Varsur, responded. "Did you hear that the Vonmar woman was at the war council this spring?" asked Kanikade. A collective groan of frustration went up from the Argatolums. Cyrilius muttered something about that glorified whore, and another Argatolum muttered something less reputable. "Why does she even leave Adasha?" Amila flicked something into the fire. "A concubine is supposed to bear the Lord Argatolum heirs, not meddle in the business of state. And she's only borne one child for the Lord Argatolum in all these years." "Concubines dabbling in politics is nothing new," Varsur commented, sipping his wine. "There have been many of them over the centuries." "And precious few of them ever did anything for the good of the invulnerables," interjected another Argatolum. Janir couldn't see which one. "Be careful what you say about Bryson Vonmar, especially here," another, a woman, interrupted. "She is the granddaughter of Slavin's ruler, cousin to the future Sultan and mother of the future Lord Argatolum." Janir's heart lurched. So the Lord Argatolum planned to murder her anyway. Then why bother kidnapping her? Why not just have her killed? What purpose did it serve? Was all Amila said in reply, stealing a glance in Janir's direction. Cyrilius also glanced reflexively to Janir, as did Kanikade, though the glances were so brief Janir doubted that any of their companions noticed or thought it conspicuous. That made Janir feel slightly better. So they might not plan to kill her, but her existence was secret, even among Argatolums. "Where is the Vonmar woman staying this winter?" Amila asked no one in particular. "In a private villa along the river near San Rial," said the woman who had cautioned everyone about insulting Bryson. "She never misses an opportunity to remind us that she was born into Slavish royalty," grumbled Varsur. That statement was greeted by mutterings of assent from the other Argatolums. Janir couldn't pity Bryson. That was beyond her capacity, since the woman had done nothing but torment her and her mother. But she did imagine that, back in Adasha, no one ever missed an opportunity to remind Bryson of her purpose. She was little better than a broodmare to them. But as soon as Bryson learned that Janir was still alive, she would try and kill her. Janir was certain of that. As Janir was the only thing standing between Lucan and future lordship, Bryson would not hesitate to have competition rooted out. Janir intended that Bryson would never learn. A group of Slavish soldiers passed by on the other side of the tents. Probably drunk, Janir reasoned, judging by the unsteady rhythm of their footsteps and the garbled laughter. A cot was set up on a rug to one side and a low table on the other, with a pitcher and several dark shapes, probably some sort of fruit, laid on it. There was nothing more she could make out and nothing to help her break free. Just a year ago, she had been certain that she had escaped her lineage, that she would be allowed to live free from the weight of her bloodline. But now her heritage had caught her, and she didn't see how she could break free. Janir wrenched her hands in what she knew was a futile effort. Everything was so useless, so pointless. Janir simply couldn't get away, and she didn't know what was going to happen, and she shuddered. There came a change of tone from the other Argotolums by the fire. All the Argotolums had risen to their feet. They had been joined by a new figure, dim and shadowed from this distance, but clearly a woman. Janir heard Cerilius and Amilla speaking to the newcomer in low voices, making their report. This must be Drusilla Tevrist Argotolum. Drusilla nodded to Amilla and Cerilius. After a few minutes, Janir heard her say, "Excellent. Where is the girl?" "We left her in your tent, milady. We thought you would want her where you could keep an eye on her," Cerilius said. "You've done well, both of you. Now get some rest, everyone. We leave tomorrow." Drusilla marched toward the tent where Janir was bound. Janir struggled against her bonds as the strange woman drew nearer. An officer in the Lord Argotolum's service could not be anything but completely fearsome. Drusilla didn't say anything as she strode past Janir to the low table, lit an oil lamp, and hung it before closing the tent flap. Janir kept on writhing in her restraints, fighting even though it was useless. "All that you'll accomplish by doing that is bloody risks," Drusilla dryly remarked, crouching in front of Janir so that they were at level. Her gaze was unwavering, scorching, though not as bad as Janir remembered her father's. "Janir Kayerson Argotolum." Hearing her own name pass the lips of another invulnerable sent chills down her spine. "You don't remember me, do you?" Janir didn't even shake her head before the Mortana continued. "You may call me Mortana Drusilla. I am Kestrel's mother, your youngest brother, or at least he is now. You had several brothers and sisters, thanks to me and the replacement the Lord Argotolum found for your mother, but, alas, they all died." Drusilla let out a breath. "So did Drusilla?" Janir refused to use the Argotolum title of respect. "Want Janir and Lucan dead so that her own son could—" No. The Lord Argotolum wouldn't have had Drusilla involved in Janir's recapture if that had been the case. He was far too devious and perceptive for that. Janir wasn't at all surprised to learn that she had had brothers and sisters that she had never met. After all, monogamy was not exactly an Argotolum virtue. Drusilla rose and unbound Janir. Janir yanked her hands free and rubbed her wrists. It had been days since they had been without some sort of tether. She could attack Drusilla, but the Mortana was still wearing her carcatan at her belt. Janir wouldn't stand a chance. Janir could make a dash for it, but she'd never make it to Karile. "I know you're already thinking about escaping. Only an idiot wouldn't be. So let me tell you, it's a very bad idea," Drusilla stated, sitting down cross-legged beside the table, which Janir now saw had a bowl of raisins, a few dried dates, a plate of figs, and some other fruit laid out on it. Janir adjusted her position on the floor and watched as Drusilla cut the strange red fruit and the small seeds spilled out onto a plate. "Do you know why?" Janir didn't think an answer was expected, so remained silent. "Because there are 30 Argotolums here with me, and I have told them all that you are to be delivered to the Lord Argotolum at any and all costs. But let's pretend, just for the fun of it, that you sneak past my warriors and make it out of our little circle here into the Slavish camp." Drusilla poured 2 cups of some dark liquid from a leather sack and nudged one in the direction of Janir. "Come, sit with me." Janir didn't see what could be gained by defiance, so obeyed. She stiffly made her way to the opposite end of the table and sat cross-legged as Drusilla had. She took the terracotta cup but didn't drink. Even though she was 16 now, she didn't like the smell or taste of wine, even though she knew plenty of people who would have disagreed. "If you were to get into the main camp, how long do you think you would last? Even if you looked like most Argotolums, which we both know you don't. You're unarmed, and there are plenty of unsavory men outside who would all too happily take advantage of that." Drusilla went on, casually nibbling at the victuals of her small table. "Then let's say you are extremely lucky and get past the scum of the army.
You still have to get past the guards stationed at the entrance to the Crichton Road if you want to go back to Brevia. You'd die along every other route. But they probably won't be sleeping on the job, and every one of them is just as likely to make sport of a girl such as yourself. Now, if you happen to be one of those rare people whom the Father Creator seems to bless for absolutely no reason, maybe you get past the guards. You still have to worry about the frost griffins on the way back, and I hear that you've already encountered a few of those. Now, tell me, do you have any escape plans? Janir stared down at her hands. No. Good, Drusilla responded, clearly satisfied. As for the boy, I hear that he has been most useful for reminding you to respect your kin. But there is no longer a need for him, do you hear me? No longer a need. I can bring you to the Lord Argatalum with or without the boy's positive influence. Do we understand one another? Janir swallowed. Yes. Very good. Drusilla smiled, raising her cup. Cheers. Janir still didn't drink, but Drusilla didn't comment. Now, you will sleep here in my tent. I've told a slave to fetch some extra blankets for your pallet. The boy will remain in the tent with Canicade and Cerilius, where they will get rid of him if there is any trouble. Drusilla spoke casually. It made Janir feel like the other Argatalum was in total control, and she guessed that was the desired effect. Janir studied Drusilla, her captor. She had an athletic look about her, lean, muscular arms, and a tight, fit build. Like all the other Argatalum women Janir had seen, Drusilla wore her silky, slow hair severely braided back. Drusilla worked swiftly and skillfully with a paring knife as she cut open the leathery red fruit. She probably handled her carcotton with an equal deftness. The tent flap stirred, and a bent-over slave entered, carrying a bundle of wool blankets in her arms. Janir normally paid attention to servants, a habit she had developed from living among many servants and few nobles in Greenhaven. But instead, Janir kept her eyes on Drusilla, studying the other Argatalum's movements, even though she didn't know what she would do even if she figured them out. The servant left, and Drusilla rose with a sigh. Help yourself to supper. There's water in that sack over there, but it tastes like leather. Oh, and I should warn you, I am a very light sleeper, as are my warriors, so don't go sleepwalking. Janir bit her lip at Drusilla's thinly masked warning. She wondered if it wouldn't be better if Drusilla were tying her up and hitting her like she had expected. Drusilla was manipulating her, even if Janir didn't understand the exact reasoning behind it or the whole plan. Janir found herself curled up on the surprisingly clean pallet, the sound of Drusilla's level breathing behind her. It was nice to be on something meant for humans, not directly on the ground. No, she mustn't think like that. She needed to think unkind things about the Argatalums so that she would be able to remember, no matter what happened, just how bad they really were. She tugged on the silver chain around her neck and drew out the glimmering stone Seovan had given her, covered in its thin web of silver wires. If she had wanted proof of miracles, the fact that none of her captors had discovered it yet was certainly one. Stroking it, Janir wondered if Seovan was coming at all. She reminded herself that she was in a perilous place and that it was unfair to expect Seovan to brave it for her. But she hoped she'd do it for him. Maybe he had tried to come for her, but for some reason couldn't. No, Seovan was coming for her, but Janir wasn't so certain that was a comforting thought any longer. What would the Argatalums do to him if he were caught? Janir stuffed the stone back under the collar of her dress. The dark green linen had started showing holes here and there, but thankfully none of them were letting the stone show just yet. She closed her eyes. She might as well get some sleep while it was offered her. You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.